So if you can cast your mind back to what would have been last Thursday, I introduced the second part of the orientation to these 38 blessings or enlightened living. And at that time, I think I left you on the note that there are 10 levels, like a staircase, of different things that can be cultivated. If you can cultivate them, then they predict that good things are going to come into your life. And each of those 10 steps has several virtues or blessings included in them, sometimes 3, sometimes 4. And what we're going to do today is to start on the very first step, which is called the first grouping of blessings, and it has 3 in it. The theme of this first step on the path of the blessings is turning your back on any previous unwholesomeness in your own life. So you can imagine if you're a person who is coming from a dark place, or a person who is coming from a place where they really don't know the ropes in terms of spiritual cultivation and they're feeling around for a direction, then this is where they start. And I'm not sort of going to patronize you by saying that you really need this, but at the same time you may need to examine yourself to see whether there are still elements of these which are perhaps holding you back from your own spiritual cultivation. So turning your back on any previous unwholesomeness in your life, and consists of 3 things to train yourself in. And the reason that these are grouped together is because that any goodness you get from your human environment tends to come as part and parcel of the people who you brush up against, or you know, or who you look up to. Because the goodness doesn't come floating through the air, it comes along with the people who you know, who influence you, who set your norms in life, who give you all your expectations about life. And a lot of this comes from people who are exemplars and influencers in your life, because for most people they don't really know what goodness is, even if they were to go looking for it. So they can't see goodness in the world around them, but possibly they can tell the people who have goodness by looking at various features of those people. Or on the other way of looking at it, they can tell the people who maybe lack those qualities, or who might be a bad influence. So they can't see the danger in those bad influences, but maybe they can spot the sort of people who might be like that. And this is where a person might start, especially children. So this is because goodness is rather an abstract quality, and most people just have their own opinions about what's good or bad. So it's difficult, if you're running blind, to be able to pick out the sort of things that you're interested in incorporating into your own character or your own sense of training. So being able to recognize people is the first step on this ladder of blessings. The first of these is to avoid the sort of people who are habitually mixed up with unwholesomeness in their lives. The second step is to turn towards people who might be a positive influence in life. And the third one is to celebrate those who are habitually good. So it's almost entirely to do with how we select our friends. Friends in a broad definition of the term, because those friends might be our family, they might be our colleagues, they might be our teachers or students. And we come today to start off on the first half of blessing number 1, which is called Not Associating with fools. So for the 38 blessings of life, although all of them are important, but you could argue that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a first step. And this is the first step on those path, at least, of 38 blessings. And not associating with fools is something which, if you get it right, then it sets you off on the journey in a productive way. How you would spot such a person who is a bad influence sometimes depends on what that person sees as profit in life, because that will determine where they channel their efforts. If they are an entrepreneur, then they might define profit in life in terms of economics. If they are a criminal, then they might think about profit in life as cracking the world's most impenetrable safe or ripping off as many people as they can, so that might be their idea of profit. So although people seek success in their various ways, then mostly it comes down to what they think of as profit in life. Depends on what they see as normal or at least good enough. So not saying that criminals are necessarily subpar people, but they got a wrong definition about what normal or good enough is in life, and that's all their other actions and habits in life follow from that. So how a person defines what they're trying to get out of life or what is beneficial, it determines a lot of important things. And this is why you can't assume things like common sense is something that everyone is going to have. So the sort of common sense that leads people to try to do better things with their lives is called by the sort of technical term discretion. Discretion being able to tell the difference between something that is beneficial or harmful for your future. And the idea of these first group of blessings is that people who are fools don't have this, but people who have wisdom, they have this discretion. So it's a personal quality which we hope to have for ourselves one day. We might already have it, or we might not have it yet. It may be nascent in our personality and gradually being formed and calibrated and influenced by the people around us. But the way we calibrate it comes as a result of the transactions which we have with other people, what that teaches us, how we form that sense of discretion, which we might call common sense, but sometimes it's not that common. So the origins of where people can get this sense of discernment come from nurture in some part and nature in other parts. So you've heard the nature-nurture question. The nurture part is that we get discretion from the influence of what brushes off on us from the people who are closest to us and who we look up to often. The nature part is the part that we bring to the equation ourselves. It's the part of our innate ability to recognize things which are the truth or not the truth in our lives. People might give us advice, but in the end we have to decide for ourselves whether we believe it or not. And this ability in Buddhism is sometimes called the ability to be a good teacher to yourself. It's called by the Pali term yoniso manasikara. So we don't have that usually in the beginning, but we gradually develop it. Especially meditation helps us to develop this quality. But if we have it, then even if we get bad advice, then we can still turn it around into something that is accurate. If we don't have it, then even if people give us the right advice, we end up getting the wrong end of the stick. So, generally speaking, between the nature and the nurture side, in the very beginning, the nurture is the bigger influence. And it brushes off as part of the people around us. And as we may lack maturity in the beginning, then we may be warped or derailed from our pathway of developing this ability to be a teacher to ourselves or to develop discretion if we get bad influences right at the beginning. It's like you might have a splendid palace which you built, but if you build it right next to, let's say, a shanty town, and the shanty town catches fire, then your wonderful palace, no matter how great it looked at the beginning, also burns down. So it's by the proximity to risk or danger that you may waste all the efforts you've done in building a bright future for yourself. So by the same token, to associate with a person who has a very negative influence, no matter how good we might be originally, it may be burned down, just as that palace was burned down next to the shanty town. So this is a metaphor for how a virtuous person can be destroyed by associating with fools. So every time we have a transaction with another person, it's like there's a tug of war which goes on between us and them to see whose sense of discretion is going to brush off on who. In a situation where people are unable to sort of be selective about what they adopt from the next person and what they sort of put up a barrier against, then it tends to work rather like osmosis. So, flowing from a high point of concentration to a low point of concentration. If person A has a lot of good discretion and person B has less of it, then person A's good discretion will brush off on person B. If person C has a lot of bad discretion or inaccurate discretion and person D less of that, then person C's bad discretion will brush off on person D. So for adults, generally we are not quite so naive as to let anyone's habits just brush off on us without any sort of say in the matter. But for people who are new to this whole business or who don't know what to look out for, then they are particularly vulnerable of picking those habits up. And we do our best to pick up only good habits and avoid the bad ones. In that way we can have transactions with others without losing our own sense of goodness in the meantime. It's rather like visiting someone in hospital who's got a fever. You can visit them, you can talk to them, you can console them, but you would probably not want them to sneeze over you. Yeah, so you know where to draw the line with such people. However, some sort of illnesses are so strong, so contagious that you can't even come close to them, like plague or whatever. They need to be put in an isolation ward. People can visit them, but probably through a perspex screen or whatever. So the equivalent in terms of people's sense of discretion brings to mind the word grooming, which you would have heard about in the news recently. Actually, this word used to have quite a nice meaning, but these days it's rather difficult to countenance it anymore. We tend to think of it in the context of people where there is such a great danger of people being manipulated by another person. So if someone's very impressionable, as children are, then in the very contagious context there, then they can't afford to be even close to that person. So purveyors of faulty discretion are a great obstacle as we try to acquire any other blessings further down the path of the 38. The word fool comes up because it's a translation from the Pali word, Pali like Buddhist scriptural language, the word bala, which means a fool. And just to illustrate the sort of person I'm talking about, I tell you a little story. So in the time of the Buddha, there was an elder monk. This is the one in the picture here. His name was Kassapa, or Kassapa, you may have heard of him. And that's a traditional picture of him. So he was respected not only by all the other members of the monastic community, but even by the Buddha himself. The Buddha actually shared his own robe with this monk. He was, he felt he was very much on the same sort of level of knowledge. And as was the norm in the monastic community, then senior monks would accept novices as their attendants, in order that those new monks could learn the ropes and receive training in close proximity to those senior monks. So some of the elder monks accepted more than others, in keeping with their ability as teachers. Because Kassapa was a great teacher, then he accepted several of these novice monks. But it turned out that amongst the number of the novices he accepted, there was a very stubborn one. And his name was Ulunkasaddhaka. And he wouldn't listen to anyone's advice. On winter evenings, it was the duty of the novices to boil water for the elder monks to take a warm bath in comfort. And this stubborn novice would never boil the water for Kassapa, even though it was his duty. And he would always leave the chore of boiling the water to the other novices. Meanwhile, he would go himself to the monk and say, "Oh, I invite you now to take your bath," as if he'd done all the work himself. So one day, in exasperation, all the other novices heated up the water for Kassapa's bath, and then they hid most of it in the back room. So when Ulunkasaddhaka saw the steam rising from the bath, he went to inform Kassapa in a very obsequious way that his bath was ready. So the elder monk came to his bath and looked in, and there was a little bit of hot water right at the bottom. And the elder monk asked, "Oh, so where is the hot water then?" And the Ulunkasaddhaka, he dipped the ladle in, and the ladle rattled around in the water. The novice's deceit became obvious at this point. And he got stuck with the nickname at that point of Ulunkasaddhaka, which actually literally means rattling ladle. So everything else the stubborn novice did was in the same vein. Instead of going on alms round to collect food with the monks in the morning, if he fancied something special to eat, then he would claim to the temple supporters that Kassapa, this great monk, he really needs to eat this special such and such. And when they brought whatever special food that was, whatever delicacy, then he would eat it himself. Yeah. And Kassapa, he knew what was going on. And he warned this stubborn novice to be so lacking in respect is not in keeping with having taken ordination. You must train yourself better in the future. And Kassapa warned the stubborn novice continuously, but the only effect of the criticism was to make him feel as if his master was singling him out for unfair criticism. So he took it personally. The more advice he received from the master, the more victimized he felt. Instead of feeling grateful for all the patience his master had shown him, he planned on getting revenge. So next day, instead of going on alms round with all the other novices and his master, he stayed behind until no one was left in the accommodation. And then he set it on fire, burning it down before running away. So by the time the Venerable Kassapa and all the other novices returned from their alms round, all they found was the accommodation reduced to ashes. So this is an illustration of the dangers of associating with people who have the personality of a fool, who get angry even when spoken to decently. Namely, this novice Ulunkasaddhaka, who put his own master's accommodation into the torch, even though his master had only ever spoken kind words to him. And this is one of the identifying features of a foolish person, and the reasons why we have to beware of this sort of person, and why, even though it would seem to be compassionate to give everyone an equal chance, but the Buddha suggested that in this case, even Mahakassapa, this great monk with his wonderful meditation and all these teaching skills, would be better not to have taken him on in the first place. So a fool, by definition, is someone who is perceived as wicked, but also weak and feeble. And they're made feeble by the fact that they habitually say, think and do things which are unwholesome. And the gap in their common sense allows them to justify unwholesome behavior simply because their mind is not centered. And to call a dangerous person a fool might seem like a bit of an understatement, because some of them might seem a bit like psychopaths or even clever manipulators. So how can we use the term fool or feeble? Well, they're like a person with a serious disease, is weak. We don't fear them on the basis of their strength or knowledge or ability to think, but we fear them because they are contagious. So any person can have 4 sources of strength or power in their lives. The first of these is physical strength. So any healthy person with plenty of muscles already has this first quality. A second power a person might have is the strength of their knowledge, which is derived from education and life experience. So having the ability to apply your reasoning to useful subjects is a second storehouse of power. The third strength is the strength of thought. Some people go through the same classes together, they have an equal amount of knowledge, but they don't use or apply their knowledge equally. Some people may know how to fix a car engine, but they might sit around all day idly, and they don't offer their services as a mechanic, they don't go into manufacturing, they just sit around all day waiting for someone else to find them a job. So why is that? Well, they got the first 2, but they haven't got the third one. And this is why if anyone uses both their strength of knowledge and their strength of thought, then they are at a great advantage, because they're endowed with the third storehouse of power as well. But the fourth and final one is the strength of virtue. So when one has all the physical and thought and ability to apply that knowledge as well, to bring benefit to oneself and others, if you apply it also in a way that is wholesome and beneficial to yourself and others, then you could said to be endowed with that fourth storehouse of power. So the strength of virtue. And everyone has the potential to have all 4 of these. Even if someone is endowed with only some of these 4, then already they stand a good chance of having a successful life if they got the last one. However, if a foolish guy has the first 3, maybe they are physically strong, maybe they got a degree in chemistry, and maybe they got the inclination to apply their knowledge, but they apply their knowledge of chemistry for dishonest purposes, such as like these Breaking Bad characters who go and cook up meth, then they undermine their potential. So they're a bit like a 4-cylinder car that's only running on 3 cylinders. And if you end up like that, then you need urgent repairs, otherwise your engine is going to seize up. So the fools present a risk not only to themselves but also to the people around them, because it's catching. And as we should see that we need to be able to recognize these people who have these foolish qualities, because it's the simple lack of the fourth strength which people can have will end up spilling over into the sort of way people around them start to think as well. Like, oh, well, he's not doing anything with his knowledge, well, maybe I won't do anything with mine either. Or misapply it, or put it into all the effort into things which are actually damaging, or leading them into sort of the underworld of life instead of into something which will lead to a brighter future. So this time, I have given you a little bit of a brief introduction to what we mean by fools, maybe how to identify some of these fools. Next time I see you, which I guess will be on Tuesday, I will introduce you a little bit more to the character of these fools, how they offer a sense of false friendship to people, this, in keeping with this idea of grooming and whatever, manipulative sort of friendship, and also how we can best insulate ourselves against the influence of such people in our lives. So I will save that for the next time, and in the meantime, for today, I think I will leave it there. Yes.